wedding invitation arrived on a Wednesday afternoon. Not by text. Not as a sudden phone call from a relative trying to sound warmer than history allowed. It came by courier in a cream envelope with embossed lettering and a ribbon tucked neatly beneath the flap, as if good stationery could do the emotional work no one else had done. My mother placed it on the kitchen table without opening it. She didn't have to say whose name was inside. There are some people whose presence reaches the room before proof does. I looked at the envelope and felt the old sensation return. Not fear exactly, not anymore, but a tightening I remember from childhood, the body's private way of saying, be careful. This story has hurt you before. On the back, in tidy script, was the name of my cousin Lena. Lena, who once watched her mother turn mine into unpaid help and never said a word. Lena, who used to call me too sensitive when I cried. Lena, who is now apparently getting married in a ballroom with chandeliers and string musicians and enough flowers to suggest purity. My mother said, very calmly, "Leave it there." That was how I knew she was angry. Anger in my mother does not usually arrive as volume. It arrives as control, as precision, as hands folded too neatly, as tea made, but not drunk, as a refusal to let other people decide which version of the past gets invited inside. By dinner time, 3 people had already called. My father first, then my grandmother, then my aunt's husband, who had somehow found a softer voice in late middle age than he ever possessed when we were living under his roof. No one opened with an apology. That felt important. No one said, before anything else, we know what happened and we know why this is hard. No one said, we were wrong. No one said, your mother did not deserve what we allowed. No one said, you were a child and we frightened you. They all used the language families use when they want access without accountability. It would mean a lot. Don't make this bigger than it is. It's been years. This is Lena's special day. Come for a little while at least. People will ask questions. Your father is already under pressure. Pressure. That was the family religion. Not kindness. Not honesty. Pressure. Everyone was always under it. And somehow it always traveled downhill until it landed on whichever woman was expected to absorb it quietly. When I was 8, my father's business failed in a way he never described clearly to me. What I understood at the time was simple. Grown-ups whispered more than usual, bills arrived in sharper-looking envelopes, and one Sunday, my mother packed our clothes into 2 large canvas bags and told me we were going to stay with my aunt for a little while. A little while became 5 months. At first, I thought that house was beautiful. It sat at the edge of a gated neighborhood with a tiled courtyard and a long balcony where laundry dried in rows like surrender flags. My aunt liked expensive bowls she never let anyone use. My cousins had matching lamps and upholstered headboards and perfume lined up on their dressers, like they had been born into a world where drawers were always full. I thought maybe that house would save us. Children are humiliatingly hopeful that way. For the first 3 days, everyone behaved as though we were guests. My aunt told people from church how happy she was to, quote, help family in a difficult season. My uncle bought pastries. My cousins asked me polite questions about school. My father relaxed visibly, which now I understand as its own kind of danger. Once the man with power feels relieved, he stops checking whether the women beside him are paying for that relief. By the 2nd week, my mother had become part of the machinery of the house. It started in ways that could almost be defended, if you needed to defend them. Could you rinse those plates? Could you chop these vegetables? Could you put the laundry in before you sleep? But tasks multiply differently when they are attached to contempt. Soon my mother was waking before everyone else to sweep, cook, wipe counters, scrub bathrooms, fold table linens, and refill the tea things before my aunt came downstairs. Their maid, who usually came 6 days a week, was suddenly told to take extra time off. No one announced what that meant. No one had to. I remember standing in the kitchen one morning with my cereal bowl, while my aunt gave instructions in the tone wealthy women reserve for people they do not fear. She did not shout. She barely looked up. She simply assumed my mother would stay in motion, because that was what useful women did. My mother still tried to be gracious then. She said thank you too often. She offered help before being asked. She believed, for a while, that if she remained dignified enough, the house would become ashamed of itself. But shame only works on people who have one. My cousins were older than me by almost a decade, which meant they understood exactly what they were doing. They had the cruelty of people who know they can always retreat into the word joke. They commented on my mother's accent when she was tired. They mocked the way our bags were stacked in the small room off the back corridor. They acted as though my father's misfortune had contaminated us with a lower social temperature. And because I was a child, desperate for approval, I followed them. That is one of the details I hate admitting, but it is true. I hovered around them. I offered to help carry makeup trays and hair clips and shopping bags. I laughed when they wanted me to laugh, because children believe proximity can become protection if they perform it hard enough. One afternoon, one of them came home from university for the weekend. I was thrilled because she seemed glamorous in the way older girls do when you are still missing teeth in school photos. She walked in wearing dark sunglasses, dropped her bag near the stairs, and I trailed behind her asking whether dorm life was fun, and whether she had met anyone famous, and whether college was scary. She turned, looked straight at me, and shouted, "Would you get away from me?" Not loud in the ordinary sense. Loud in the body sense. Loud enough to stop your lungs. Loud enough that the room learned something about your ranking. I remember not crying right away because I was too startled. I stood frozen near the banister, holding the corner of my own shirt. When the tears finally came, they embarrassed me more than her voice had. My mother heard. She came from the back hall with her hands still damp from dishwater and told my cousin not to speak to me like that. That was the moment the house showed its full shape. My aunt came in first, then my uncle, then the other cousin. Then, after enough noise had gathered to make neutrality feel costly, my father. No one asked what happened in a real way. Not with curiosity, not with care. They moved immediately to formation. The family closed around itself like a fist. Suddenly my mother was dramatic, ungrateful, disrespectful in someone else's home. Always creating tension, always finding fault. Why was I so sensitive? Why could we not just let things go? Why did everything become a scene with us? I watched my father watch all of this. That is one of the hardest memories, not because he yelled first, because he hesitated, because there was a visible second in which he could have chosen us. And then he didn't. He sided with comfort, with shelter, with the people whose money and space were currently protecting his pride. He spoke to my mother as if she were the disruption, not the insult. He told her not to start trouble. He told her to think about our situation. He told her we had to be practical. Practical, another Holy Family word. It usually meant absorb what humiliates you and call it maturity. After that, the house became openly hostile. Doors closed harder. Conversations stopped when we entered rooms. Sometimes my cousins would say things to me when no adults were near. You know he believes us, not you. If we tell him you were rude, you'll be in trouble. Don't test how far this can go. Children should not learn political intimidation before algebra, but some of us do. Once, my grandparents visited with a tin full of imported chocolates and several wrapped boxes. They kissed my cousins on both cheeks, called them pretty, handed out gifts, and moved through the room like benevolent royalty. I stood near the doorway, waiting in that foolish, hopeful way kids wait, when exclusion has not yet finished teaching its lesson. They gave something to each cousin. They gave something to my aunt. They gave something to my uncle. They even gave my father a watch strap. I got nothing. Not even a stray sweet pressed into my palm as an afterthought. It is such a small image from the outside, a child not receiving a gift. But children do not measure events by adult scale, we measure them by meaning. And the meaning was unmistakable. You are not one of us. When generosity is being counted. The night we left was hot and windless. I remember that because the air felt cruelly still, while everything else was moving too fast. There had been another argument, this time worse. My mother had finally snapped after my aunt criticized the way she folded bedding, and one of my cousins repeated, in front of me, that some people should learn gratitude before self-respect. My mother said something that I have never forgotten. She said, "Help that charges rent in humiliation is not help." It was the bravest thing I had ever heard, and it cost us immediately. Voices rose. My uncle told us if we were so unhappy, no one was forcing us to stay. My aunt said we had brought poison into her house. My father tried, briefly, to calm everyone, but by then he had already lost the moral authority to do it. When a man lets injustice breathe long enough, he cannot later control the smoke. We packed in less than an hour. My school uniform went in with my mother's shawls. toothbrushes wrapped in a towel, soap dish, sandals. A photo frame with the glass removed because it had cracked weeks earlier and no one thought it mattered. We left through the side gate because the front entry was still full of relatives talking over one another, as if our departure were an inconvenience to the evening. I remember looking back once, not at the adults, at the balcony, at the laundry line, at the window of the room where my cousins were still standing. I wanted, in some childish, impossible way, for one of them to look ashamed. None of them did. After that, life did what life always does. It moved. Not quickly, not kindly, but forward. My father recovered financially over the years. We moved into a smaller place of our own. I got older. My mother and I became a kind of private country inside the house, loyal in ways that feel almost spiritual after betrayal. My father never hit the same emotional position with me again. We rebuilt something functional, but not innocent. That is the thing people misunderstand about family damage. They think time restores the original shape. It doesn't. Time builds an annex around the fracture and teaches everyone where not to step too hard. My father kept contact with them. Of course he did. He called it peacekeeping. I call it refusing to live inside the truth of what happened. Every birthday, every festival, every funeral, he behaved as though maintaining the bridge mattered more than admitting who got pushed off it. He would hand me the phone and say, "Wish your aunt well. Wish your cousins happy birthday. Don't be rude." As if manners could be extracted from me, while memory could be confiscated. Now Lena was getting married. Now the same family that once treated my mother like a utility had a seating chart. Now there would be floral installations and rented gold chairs, and a photographer telling everyone to move closer, closer, closer. And apparently my mother and I were expected to appear in the background of that new myth. I imagined the event with painful clarity. My aunt greeting guests as though she had always been generous. My grandmother dabbing her eyes at the ceremony. My father standing in tailored clothes, relieved that attendance had solved a problem. Someone from another branch of the family leaning toward my mother and saying, "Isn't it lovely we can all come together like this?" That sentence alone made me feel tired to my bones. Because that is what weddings can become in damaged families. Not celebrations, but laundering machines. Everyone dresses well enough to pass the past through clean fabric and soft lighting until the truth comes out barely recognizable. My mother finally opened the envelope that evening. Inside was a heavy card with calligraphy and an additional handwritten note from my aunt. It said, "Family should be present for blessings. We hope old misunderstandings will not keep you from this important day." Old misunderstandings. I read that line 3 times. There is no more efficient insult than renaming someone else's injury into a clerical error. Not abuse, misunderstanding. Not degradation, miscommunication. Not betrayal, family complexity. I looked at my mother, waiting for anger. Instead, she laughed once, a small, disbelieving laugh. Then she said, "If they needed me for the hard years, I was labor. If they need me now, I am decoration." That was the sentence that decided it for me. Not because I needed convincing, because she had named the whole structure perfectly. The next morning, my father came by. He stood in the kitchen with the careful patience of a man who knows he is asking for something unreasonable, and has therefore chosen the tone of reason as camouflage. He said Lena was young when all that happened. He said weddings were not the place to make statements. He said people would talk. He said my aunt had reached out, which apparently counted as generosity. He said my grandparents were getting older and would be hurt. He said we should come for an hour, if not the whole thing. He said surely after all this time we could be civil. Civil. Another interesting word. Women are often asked to be civil when what is really required is silence with lipstick. I asked him one question. I said, "If I go, what exactly am I helping everyone believe?" He had no answer. Not a real one. He said I was making this philosophical. He said it was simpler than that. He said it was just a wedding. But it was never just a wedding. That was the point. If it were just a wedding, no one would need our attendance so badly. We were being recruited as evidence. Our presence would not merely fill 2 chairs. It would certify the false version. It would let every person in that ballroom tell themselves the family had healed, when, in fact, the family had simply learned which members were expected to heal quietly and alone. I thought about what the comments might say if this were someone else's story. Leave the flowers to people who planted them. An invitation without apology is administration, not love. The father was the deeper betrayal. Do not attend your own erasure. And that, really, was the audience split, though not much of a split at all. The strongest read was obvious. The problem was not whether weddings deserve respect. The problem was whether respect can be demanded from people whose suffering was never respected in return. My mother did not rage. She did not compose a speech. She did not tell stories to the extended family trying to win a verdict. She made lentils for lunch. She wiped the counter. She moved through the kitchen with the kind of groundedness I have spent my whole life trying to learn. Then she said, "I have already attended enough of their life at my own expense." So we did not go. That is not the dramatic part. The dramatic part is how many people believe absence requires explanation when cruelty never did. By evening, my phone carried 3 missed calls, 2 voice notes, and 1 message from a cousin I had not heard from in years, telling me family is family at the end of the day. I almost replied. Then I realized something useful. That sentence only ever arrives from people who benefited from the arrangement. The ones asked to absorb the damage are rarely the ones praising family in abstract nouns. On the day of the wedding, my mother and I stayed home. We made tea in the good glasses we save for ordinary happiness. We did not dress up. We did not perform resilience. We did not stare at the clock wondering when the ceremony started. We did not do the work of imagining ourselves into their photos. At one point, I caught my mother sitting by the window in the late afternoon light, sewing a loose button back onto one of her blouses. There was something about that image that broke and healed me at the same time. The steadiness of it. The refusal to let spectacle outrank peace. The fact that while they were arranging centerpieces and rehearsing speeches about love, she was simply mending what belonged to her. That, I think, is what I want the story to keep. Not revenge, not even vindication, just proportion. People imagine strength as confrontation, because confrontation is cinematic. But often the bravest act in family systems like this is administrative. Quiet. Unphotographed. You decline. You do not explain beyond necessity. You stop volunteering yourself as raw material for other people's redemptive storylines. You refuse to play the healed person in a room that never acknowledged the wound. There are relatives who will call that bitterness. They are wrong. Bitterness is when the injury keeps owning you. This was ownership going the other direction. This was deciding that access to us would no longer be free, just because an invitation had nicer paper than an eviction threat. If I sound clear now, it is because my confusion used to be expensive. For years, I thought maturity meant being the least inconvenient person in the room. I thought dignity meant enduring insult elegantly enough that no one could accuse me of escalation. I thought my father's discomfort was evidence that the truth should be softened for his sake. But some truths grow sharper when you keep trying to pad them. Mine did. The people who hurt us never wanted reconciliation in the moral sense. They wanted logistical participation. A head count. A family picture. A sealed envelope in a gift box. A way to tell the future that whatever happened back then could not have been that bad, because look, everyone came. We did not give them that sentence. And maybe that is the cleanest ending I know. Not that justice arrived in a dramatic burst. Not that apologies finally came flooding in. Not that my father became the man I needed him to be when I was a child. Only this. A gold envelope arrived asking us to forget. And for once, we didn't.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.